Have you ever felt as if the weight of the world was on your shoulders? As if every word spoken by someone else, every glance of disapproval, every small criticism, was an arrow piercing straight through your soul? I know this feeling. I lived for a long time with the impression that my emotional skin was too thin for this world. A conversation gone wrong would haunt me for days. A negative comment on social media would ruin my week. A plan that didn't go as expected was enough to convince me that I was a failure. I used to blame the world. I blamed people for being insensitive, fate for being cruel, circumstances for being unfavorable. It was easier to believe the problem was out there. But, in a moment of painful clarity, during a silent and lonely night, an undeniable truth crystallized in my mind. If everything affected me with such intensity, it wasn't because the world was excessively hostile. It was because, on the inside, I was fragile. I was like a sandcastle built too close to the sea, and any wave, no matter how small, threatened to bring me down completely. This realization wasn't liberating at first. It was terrifying. Admitting your own fragility is like admitting a fundamental weakness. But it was the first necessary step on a journey to build something more solid. An inner fortress. If you recognize yourself in this description, if you feel that life hits you harder than it should, this video is not here to judge you. It's an invitation. An invitation to look inward together and understand the roots of this fragility, and more importantly, to discover how to forge the strength that lies dormant in each of us. If you are also on this search for emotional balance, for clarity in your decisions, and for a way to better navigate the storms of life, then know that this space was created for you. I invite you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel because with each video our promise is this. You will be fortified from within and you will learn to see the world with greater wisdom. 1. The diagnosis: emotional hypersensitivity. Before we seek the cure, we must understand the ailment. This condition of being affected by everything has a name: emotional hypersensitivity. I'm not referring here to the personality trait of highly sensitive people, which is innate, but to a state of extreme reactivity that we acquire throughout life. I lived in this state. It was like navigating a stormy sea in a leaking boat. Any small ripple became a threat of shipwreck. I remember a time I presented a project at work. I had dedicated weeks to it, but during the presentation my boss asked a simple question, questioning one of the data points. To him it was just a point to be clarified. To me it was a declaration that my entire work was useless. I felt my blood run cold, my voice trembled, and I spent the rest of the day replaying that moment, convinced my career was over. The objective reality was one thing: a question was asked. My internal reality was another, a cataclysm of self-doubt and fear. This disproportion between the external trigger and the internal reaction is the main symptom. It's when a no turns into personal rejection. It's when silence turns into abandonment. It's when a mistake turns into proof of permanent inability. Living like this is exhausting. The mind is constantly on high alert, scanning for threats, interpreting every interaction through a filter of negativity and vulnerability. You can't relax because the next blow could come from anywhere at any time. This fragility also manifests in the inability to set boundaries. For fear of disappointing, of being seen in a bad light, of provoking a conflict we don't feel strong enough to endure, we say yes when we want to say no. We accumulate responsibilities that are not ours, we swallow frustrations and resentments, all to avoid the possibility of a confrontation. In the process we empty ourselves. Our life force, which should be used to build our dreams, is spent managing the fear of others' reactions. It is a slow and silent form of self-annulment. Recognizing these patterns in myself was the first step to understanding that the battle was not against the world, but against the fragile structure I had allowed to form within me. 2. The root of fragility. Why do we feel this way? A building does not become fragile overnight. Its structure is compromised slowly by poorly built foundations, low-quality materials, and the constant erosion of time. The same happens with our inner fortress. This fragility we feel was not born with us. It was built, brick, by a series of factors. The first, and perhaps most significant, is the relentless pursuit of external validation. From childhood, many of us are taught, directly or indirectly, that our worth depends on the approval of others. Grades in school, praise from parents, popularity among friends. We grow up handing over the power to define our own value to third parties. As adults, this dynamic continues. We seek validation from our partners, our bosses, the number of likes on a photo. The problem is that, in doing so, our self-esteem becomes a variable we do not control. It rises and falls with the whims and opinions of others. We become addicted to praise and devastated by criticism because we believe they define who we are. Another deep root is the lack of self-knowledge. If you don't know who you are, what your values are, your non-negotiable principles, your strengths and your weaknesses, any external opinion becomes a potential truth. I spent years without doing this work of introspection. I was a compilation of the expectations others had of me. When someone criticized me for being too quiet, I believed there was something wrong with me instead of understanding that introspection was part of my nature. When someone told me my dream was unrealistic, I abandoned the idea because I didn't have a strong enough internal conviction to sustain it. Without a solid, self-defined core, we are like a leaf in the wind, carried by any breath of opinion. We also cannot ignore the weight of past experiences. Traumas, rejections, painful failures. These experiences leave scars. If they are not processed and healed, they create limiting beliefs within us. A past betrayal can make us believe that no one is trustworthy. A business failure can convince us that we were not born for success. These beliefs function like a faulty operating system, running in the background and making us interpret the present through the lens of past pain. Each new situation becomes just an opportunity for the old wound to be reopened. The fragility, in this case, is the unresolved pain that continues to haunt us. Understanding these roots is not about blaming the past, but about illuminating the shadows so that we can finally begin to heal them. 3. Building the inner fortress, the role of self-knowledge. If a lack of self-knowledge is one of the roots of fragility, then the quest for it is the foundation of our fortress. Building inner strength is not about becoming insensitive or cold. It's about knowing yourself so deeply that the opinions of others lose the power to define you. It is to know with unshakable certainty who you are. This journey began for me with simple but uncomfortable questions. I took a notebook and started writing without filters. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly value in life beyond what society says is important? What are my non-negotiable principles, those lines I would not cross for anything? What are my genuine passions, those activities that make me lose track of time? And equally important, what are my shadows? My fears, my insecurities, my patterns of self-sabotage? This process of self-investigation is like being an archaeologist of your own soul. You excavate layers of social conditioning, family expectations, and masks you've created to protect yourself. It's solitary and sometimes painful work. You discover things about yourself that you'd rather ignore. But every discovery, no matter how dark, is a brick you can use to build your fortress. By bringing the darkness into the light, it loses its power over you. Self-knowledge also involves identifying and accepting your strengths. For a long time, I downplayed my qualities. If someone praised me, I would deflect, thinking it was modesty. In reality, it was a lack of recognition of my own worth. I started making a list of my achievements, no matter how small. I listed my skills, the things I'm naturally good at. This is not arrogance, it's realism. It's building an inventory of your tools. When you know you are resilient because you have overcome challenges before, the next difficulty doesn't seem so frightening. When you know you are creative, criticism of a project becomes just feedback, not a nullification of your ability. This foundation of self-knowledge creates an internal center of gravity. You stop floating according to external tides and start having your own anchor. Your identity is no longer a draft to be edited by others, but a definitive text written by you. From this point on, the words and actions of others may still reach you, but they no longer invade you. They hit against the walls of your fortress and retreat, because they find a solid structure, built with the most resistant material that exists. The truth about who you are. For the shield of reason, Stoic philosophy as a tool. After starting to build the foundation with self-knowledge, I needed a shield. A practical tool to deal with the daily attacks, with the inevitable storms of life. I found this shield in Stoic philosophy, especially in one of its most powerful principles, the dichotomy of control. The Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, taught that the secret to serenity lies in clearly distinguishing between what we can control and what we cannot. What can we control? Practically everything external to us. The actions of other people, their opinions, the economy, the weather, the past, the future. Trying to control these things is the sure recipe for frustration, anxiety, and pain. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. And what can we control? Our own thoughts, our judgments, our reactions, our choices. Our will. It is here and only here that our true power lies. When I internalized this idea, it was as if a blindfold had been removed from my eyes. I realized that my fragility came from investing all my emotional energy in things that were outside my control. I wanted to control what others thought of me. I wanted to control the outcome of every project. I wanted to control the way people treated me. And because I failed miserably in all these attempts, I felt powerless and weak. I began to actively practice the dichotomy of control. Before an important meeting, instead of worrying will they like it, I focused on what I could control. I will prepare as best as I can, I will organize my ideas clearly, I will speak with confidence. The outcome of the meeting was out of my control, but the quality of my preparation and performance was entirely in my hands. This changed everything. The anxiety decreased and the confidence increased. When someone criticized me, instead of plunging into the pain of the criticism, I asked myself, is this in my control? The person's opinion was not. But my reaction was. I could choose to ignore it. I could choose to analyze the criticism coldly to see if there was anything useful in it. I could choose to reaffirm my own worth, regardless of that opinion. Stoicism gave me a shield. Not a shield that made me immune to life, but one that allowed me to choose where the arrow would land. I could let it hit my fragile ego, or I could deflect it with the shield of reason, protecting my core, my inner citadel. This daily practice, this constant reminder to focus only on my field of control, was what began to transform fragility into steel-like resilience. 5. The practice of resilience, turning criticism into fuel. Having a shield is essential, but true strength lies not only in defending yourself, but in knowing how to use the energy of the attack to your advantage. Resilience is not just about enduring pain, it's about metabolizing it and turning it into growth. I began to see criticism, failures, and adversities not as personal attacks but as data, as fuel for my improvement. This change in perspective is crucial. When someone criticized me, instead of my automatic reaction of pain and defense, how dare they say that, I began to train a new response, a response based on curiosity. What can I learn from this? I became an emotional alchemist. My task was to extract the gold, the learning, from the lead, the criticism. Not all criticism contains gold. Much of it is just projection, envy, or pure malice. Learning to discern is part of the process. Constructive criticism, even if delivered rudely, usually points to a specific flaw in your work or behavior, not in your identity. For example, if someone said, "Your report is confusing," instead of hearing, "You are incompetent," I learned to hear, "I need to improve my written communication skills." The first interpretation weakened me, the second gave me a clear action plan to strengthen myself. For destructive criticism, the kind that attacks who you are, the practice was different. Conscious disposal. I visualized it as toxic waste that someone was trying to dump in my garden. I didn't have to accept it. I didn't have to analyze it. I just recognized that the waste belonged to the person throwing it, not to me. It was a reflection of their darkness, not mine. This took practice, but over time it got easier. My inner fortress now had a waste management system. Failure also underwent this reframing. Before, every failure was proof of my inadequacy. Now, every failure is a stepping stone. I remember launching a small online project that was a total failure. No one was interested. The old me would have been devastated for weeks. The me in training performed an autopsy on the project. What went wrong? Was the marketing bad? Was the product not good enough? Was the target audience wrong? I noted every lesson. The project failed, but I didn't. I learned. And the knowledge gained from that failure was the seed of the next project's success. Resilience, therefore, is a muscle. It gets stronger with use. Every time you face adversity and actively choose to learn from it instead of letting it bring you down, you add another layer of steel to your armor. You begin to understand that the hardest moments of your life are, in fact, your best teachers and the greatest architects of your strength. 6. Emotional detachment. The art of not taking it personally. One of the most liberating lessons on my journey was understanding that most of what happens around us is not about us. The art of not taking things personally is, perhaps, the most advanced skill in building inner strength. It's what allows you to walk through the world with a sense of lightness and freedom, even amidst the chaos of human interactions. I used to be the center of my own universe in a very negative way. If someone was in a bad mood, I immediately assumed I had done something wrong. If a friend canceled a plan, it was a sign they no longer liked me. If a driver cut me off in traffic, it was a personal attack on my existence. Living like that is like being the protagonist of a drama that only exists in your head. The turning point came when I started practicing radical empathy, but in a counterintuitive way. I began to understand that each person operates from their own universe of pain, fears, insecurities, and experiences. The rude waitress is not being rude to me. She might be exhausted, worried about a sick child, or just having a terrible day. The friend who canceled the plan might be struggling with anxiety or overwhelmed with work. The rushing driver might be on their way to an emergency. This is not about making excuses for others' bad behavior, but about understanding its origin. And the origin 99% of the time has nothing to do with you. What people say and do is a reflection of their own internal state, of the lens through which they see the world. It's a projection of the movie playing in their own head. When you understand this deeply, the offense loses its power. An exercise that helped me was from The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. The second agreement is, don't take anything personally. I repeated this like a mantra. When I felt the sting of a word or action, I would stop and breathe. And I would remind myself, this is not about me. I visualized the person's action as a ball they were throwing. Before, I felt the obligation to catch that ball, examine it, suffer over it. Now, I learned to simply let the ball pass. I don't have to catch it. It's not mine. This emotional detachment doesn't make you apathetic. On the contrary, it makes you more compassionate. You stop reacting to people's projections and start seeing the pain behind them. You become less reactive and more observant. Your inner peace stops depending on the goodwill or good mood of others. It becomes yours unconditionally. And that is true freedom. The freedom of not being an emotional hostage to the behavior of others. 7. The strength of silence and selective solitude. In a world that glorifies extroversion, constant connection, and noise, I discovered that one of the greatest sources of strength lies in the opposite. In silence and selective solitude. Fragility is often fueled by an overdose of external stimuli, a cacophony of opinions and expectations that prevents us from hearing our own inner voice. I was afraid to be alone with my thoughts. Silence was uncomfortable because it was where my fears and insecurities screamed the loudest. So, I filled it with anything: music, podcasts, videos, meaningless conversations. I was always connected, always consuming, always distracting myself from my own company. But in doing so, I was running away from the only place where true healing could happen, within myself. The decision to embrace solitude was deliberate. I started with small steps. I would turn off my phone for an hour. I would take walks in nature without headphones. I would sit in silence for 5 minutes just observing my breath. At first it was torture. My mind, addicted to distraction, rebelled. But gradually something began to change. In the absence of external noise, the voice of my intuition began to whisper. It was in solitude that the lessons I was learning began to settle. It was in silence that I could process my emotions without the judgment of others. It was in my own company that I began to feel comfortable in my own skin. Solitude ceased to be synonymous with abandonment and became synonymous with recharging, with realignment. It's like taking your car to the garage for necessary repairs. You can't fix an engine at high speed in the middle of the highway. You have to stop. Selective solitude became my sacred practice. It is the time I set aside for myself, to listen to myself, to write in my journal, to simply be. It is not an act of antisociality, but an act of self-compassion. It is in this space that I strengthen my walls, check the foundations of my fortress, and plan my strategies. When I return to the world, I return more centered, calmer, less reactive. If you feel constantly drained and affected by everything, ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone and in silence? When was the last time you allowed yourself to do nothing? Strength is not built only in battle but also in the strategic rest of the warrior. Find your sanctuary of silence. Cultivate the pleasure of your own company. It is in this sacred space that fragility dissolves and inner strength condenses. 8. The body as a temple, the physical-emotional connection. For a long time, in my quest for mental strength, I made a classic mistake. I treated my mind and body as two separate entities. I tried to fix my emotional fragility with thoughts and philosophies, while completely neglecting the physical vehicle that carried that mind. The truth I learned the hard way is that a strong mind cannot reside in a fragile and neglected body. I remember phases when my emotional reactivity was at its peak. These were the exact same phases when I was sleeping poorly, eating processed food, and living a sedentary life. I was anxious, irritable, and any little thing was the trigger for an explosion or a dive into sadness. I thought it was just my emotional state, without realizing that my body was screaming for help. The connection is undeniable and scientifically proven. Lack of sleep directly affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional control and decision-making. When you are sleep-deprived, your amygdala, the center of fear and reactivity, becomes hyperactive. You literally become more fragile and reactive. A good night's sleep is not a luxury, it's a fundamental pillar of emotional resilience. Nutrition also plays a crucial role. A diet high in sugar and ultra-processed foods causes inflammation not only in the body but also in the brain, and is linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety. On the other hand, nutrient-rich foods like those found in a balanced diet provide the building blocks for the neurotransmitters that regulate our mood, such as serotonin and dopamine. I started treating food not as a source of momentary pleasure, but as the fuel for my inner fortress. And finally, movement. Physical exercise is perhaps the most potent and underutilized antidepressant and anxiolytic that exists. It releases endorphins, improves sleep, reduces stress hormones like cortisol, and promotes the growth of new neurons. When I started exercising regularly, not with the goal of changing my appearance, but of strengthening my mind, I felt a dramatic change. The nervous energy that used to turn into anxiety was now spent in physical activity. I finished each session feeling calmer, clearer, and more capable of handling the day's challenges. Do not underestimate the power of these three pillars: sleep, nutrition, and movement. They are the physical foundation upon which the mental fortress is built. If you are trying to strengthen your mind while abusing your body, you are fighting a losing battle. Start treating your body as a sacred temple, the only one you have to inhabit in this life. By taking care of your body, you are directly and powerfully taking care of your mind. 9. Small daily victories. Creating a cycle of confidence. Building an inner fortress doesn't happen through a single heroic act, but through the consistent accumulation of small daily victories. Confidence, which is the antidote to fragility, is not something you decide to have. It's something you earn that you deserve through your own actions. When I was at the peak of my fragility, my self-esteem was non-existent because I constantly broke the promises I made to myself. I would say I was going to wake up early and I wouldn't. I'd say I was going to start a project and I wouldn't. I'd say I was going to set a boundary and I wouldn't. Every broken promise was more proof to my subconscious that I was not reliable, that I was weak. The strategy to reverse this was to start small. Ridiculously small. The idea was to create a cycle of victories, no matter how minor, to begin rebuilding trust in myself. My first promise was, I will make my bed every morning without exception. It was such a simple task it was almost impossible to fail. And every day upon completing it, I started the day with a small victory. It was a signal to my brain, I said I would do something and I did it. From there, I started adding other small promises. I will drink a glass of water as soon as I wake up. I will read 2 pages of a book. I will take a 10-minute walk. Each completed task was another brick in the wall of my self-confidence. These were actions that depended on no one but me. They were 100% within my control. This concept, known as habit stacking, creates momentum. The confidence generated by making the bed pushes you to take the walk. The mental clarity from the walk helps you focus on reading, and so on. These small actions begin to rewrite the narrative you tell about yourself. You stop being the person who never finishes anything, and become the person who keeps their promises. This practice has a profound effect on how you deal with the outside world. When you trust yourself, external validation becomes less necessary. You don't need others to tell you that you are capable because you are proving it to yourself every day through your actions. Your sense of worth begins to come from within, from the respect you build for yourself by honoring your own word. If you feel fragile, start here. Stop making big promises you know you won't keep. Choose a single, tiny action you can take today. And do it. Tomorrow, do it again. And then again. Build your confidence from the ground up, one small victory at a time. It is the slowest path, but it is the only one that creates a structure that cannot be shaken. We have reached the end of our reflection, but the beginning of your construction. The journey from a state of fragility to building an inner fortress is long and requires commitment. It is not about becoming a cold, distant, or emotionless person. On the contrary, it's about becoming so strong and secure on the inside that you finally allow yourself to be truly open and vulnerable with the world, because you know that nothing and no one can destroy your core. Remember, the feeling that everything affects you is not a life sentence. It is a symptom. A sign that your internal structure needs attention, repairs, strengthening. It begins with self-knowledge to draw the blueprint of your fortress. It continues with the shield of Stoic reason to defend against inevitable attacks. It is enhanced by the alchemy of resilience, which turns pain into fuel. It is freed by emotional detachment, which unchains you from the opinions of others. It is nourished in the silence of solitude, strengthened by the care of your body, and solidified, day after day, by the discipline of small victories. You are not broken. You are, perhaps, poorly built. And the good news is that you are the architect and engineer of your own mind. You have the power to demolish the fragile structures and build, in their place, an impenetrable citadel. The question I leave you with today is, what will be the first brick you lay? What small action, what change in perspective, will you implement from now on to begin the construction of your inner fortress? Leave your answer in the comments. Let's share this journey and strengthen each other. Because the strength you are looking for is not out there. It has always been within, waiting to be built by you.